History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, we're winding back the clock to 2016 again. This is the Franklin Battlefield.
Ooh.
Lots of interesting history here, not only with the Civil War, but we have 3 locations that have all kinds of spirits hanging out.
Looking forward to doing this Redux.
Are you ready to go back?
I'm ready. Franklin, Tennessee is said to be the South's most charming city. Aside from being packed with charm, this city has a rich history. The Civil War's Battle of Franklin took place in this town in 1864. This was one of the Confederate Army's worst battles. In fact, the assault has been dubbed the Pickett's Charge of the West. The Carter House, the Lotz House, and Carnton Mansion sit where the battle took place. As is the case with so many battlefields around the world, this one is reputed to be haunted, as are the nearby homes. Join us as we explore this fascinating town, the horrific battle, and the history and hauntings of the Franklin Battlefield.
On October 26, 1799, the city of Franklin was incorporated and named for Benjamin Franklin in the state of Tennessee. The man responsible for both the incorporation and naming was State Senator Abram Maury Jr. Before the Civil War, Franklin was in one of the wealthiest counties in Tennessee, and it was the center of the plantation economy in the state as well. The Civil War weighed heavily on the town. Union forces occupied the city for 3 years. It's difficult to talk about the battle named for this city without referencing the entire town. Every building that existed during the Battle of Franklin was used as a hospital, whether it was a private home or a public gathering place. It took decades for the town to recover economically.
The Battle of Franklin was one of the bloodiest of the Civil War, which is saying a lot since so many of the battles were devastating in this war. There were 8,500 casualties in this one-day battle that took place on November 30th, 1864. Atlanta, Georgia had fallen to General William T. Sherman on September 1st, 1864. Confederate forces that had been defending the city were under the command of General John B. Hood. The defeat caused General Hood to take his forces, that numbered 30,000, into Tennessee. Hood thought he could weaken Sherman by going after the supply line coming from Nashville. Sherman wasn't worried about the supply line at this point. He figured that his army could take whatever they needed from the homes along their path. He did, however, send the Ohio Army under General John Schofield into Nashville to hold the area for the Union. That army was 30,000 strong.
In Nashville, General George Thomas already had 25,000 Union soldiers. If Schofield got there in time, the Confederacy's Hood would be outnumbered almost 2-1. Hood decided to meet Schofield before he got to Nashville, and he was successful in splitting the company. But Hood and the Confederacy were going to start making a series of mistakes. The first would be miscommunication. Schofield's army was able to regroup and pass by Hood's men in the night unscathed. The Union troops made it to Franklin. They regrouped and formed an imposing line of defense. Hood made another bad decision by deciding to pursue Schofield into Franklin. And the reason why is that this was going to become like Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. The Union was tucked nicely behind secure areas, and the Confederates were going to have to cross 2 miles of open ground to even get to where they could engage the Union.
General George Wagner of the Union met Hood's forces a half-mile in front of the Union's main line. Hood managed to press ahead because the Union soldiers behind the line didn't want to kill any of their own with friendly fire. Hood's forces slammed into the Union right outside of the Carter family's house, and combat took place in the gardens there. The Confederates were winning by using bayonets, shovels, whatever they could find to fight. Although Union Commander Emerson Updike had disobeyed orders telling him to join the Union line at the front, it proved to be a good move. Updike and his men were behind the Carter House, so they were able to surprise the Confederates and kept the Union from facing disaster.
The Carter House was built by Fountain Branch Carter in 1830. It was a 1.5-story brick house meant to house his family of 12 children.
Oh my.
That's a lot of
kids.
Mr. Carter already had a successful business in town, and he was looking to pursue farming at this new home. He was very successful and grew the farm from 19 acres to 288, and a cotton gin was installed. The battle that was currently raging around this beautiful farm was now tearing up the land. The lives of those at Carter House would be forever changed. Brigadier General Jacob D. Cox took possession of Carter House and set up his headquarters in the parlor. The Carters grabbed their slaves and they ran to their basement and hid in a north room there. The Lotz family that lived across the street hid with the Carters as well. The Carter's son Todd served as an aide to Confederate Brigadier General Thomas Benton Smith during the Battle of Franklin, and he was wounded during the fight. Several men carried his body to his family home where he would die 2 days later. The Carter farm never recovered and it was sold in 1896. The state of Tennessee eventually bought the Carter House in 1951 and it opened the home to the public in 1953. The Battle of Franklin Trust manages the property today. It's not really very refurbished. It's been renovated a little bit, but a lot of it is kind of how it always was, even from back in that time, including the home still having 1,000 bullet holes in it.
Oh my gosh, that kind of reminds me of the Jenny Wade house.
Yes, only this one, you look at one wall there, and you just see sunlight coming through everywhere because of all the holes in it.
Oh, wow. So all the way to the outside.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
The battle continued to rage, and the Union once again had the upper hand. A side note about this is that the Union had an advantage because they had 7-shot Spencers. Christopher Minor Spencer was an inventor, and he came up with the Spencer repeating rifle. It was revolutionary and reliable. The ammunition magazine was placed in the rifle's buttstock. There were 7 shots that were manually fed into the chamber by lever action. It fired as fast as a man could cock the hammer, and worked the lever. The Confederates kept pressing forward. They were stopped by a twist of timbers that they were forced to climb. It was a horrible decision, and the Confederates were picked off. Union soldiers described the scene as nightmarish, with twisted corpses caught up in the timbers. Yes.
The Confederates retreated and reformed and then went forward with a new attack 6 different times. They were nothing if not tenacious. Maybe stupid, but I guess we'll call them tenacious.
Nice.
Hood sent a final group forward in the dark. It was yet another foolish decision, and the group was quickly felled in the torchlight. The Confederates finally fell back, leaving thousands dead and wounded near the Carter House. Schofield drew his troops back to Nashville. In the end, 7,000 Confederates were left dead or wounded. 14 of them were generals.
Wow.
I mean, that's your huge chunk of your leadership. The Union suffered less than 2,000 casualties. It was a disastrous loss for the Confederacy. General Hood wasn't finished, though. He decided to pursue Schofield, and eventually there was the Battle of Nashville.
The Carnton mansion was built in 1826 and was later inherited by John and Carolyn McGavock in 1844. The home was visited by dignitaries that included Andrew Jackson and Sam Houston. Right before the Battle of Franklin began on November 30th, Carolyn noticed that the cattle were acting strangely. If she didn't know better, she would think they were scared. She would soon find out why the livestock were shaken. They apparently could hear the charge of General Hood's forces on the Union strongholds. The sounds increased as the battle raged and got closer to the mansion. The screams of dying men were everywhere. It must have been truly horrific for the McGavocks. When the battle wound down, injured men were brought to the house, and it was used as a makeshift hospital.
Carolyn jumped into helping the wounded men. She told the servants to roll up the rugs to prevent them from being damaged, and the wounded were brought inside the mansion. In all, 200 men were cared for inside the house. Their wounds were dressed with pieces of clothing that had been torn apart, and everyone was fed. Doctors came to the house and literally performed operations in the parlor. Those that didn't make it were carried outside and laid out on the back porch. 4 Confederate generals' bodies were laid out on that back porch. When the numbers of the dead were too much for the porch, bodies were stacked up against the back of the house. Unsubstantiated stories claim that there were so many dead They were stacked in huge columns. The Confederate Army decided to bury their dead right outside of the Carnton mansion. This arrangement didn't last long as wooden headboards were taken away for firewood or faded, and the McGavick family decided to donate 2 acres of their land for a proper cemetery. Today it's known as McGavick Confederate Cemetery. In April 1866, John and some of the residents of Franklin worked at raising funds and then doing the actual work of digging up bodies and moving them to the new cemetery. They laid each soldier together according to state, and they created a book of the dead to register names, and Carolyn maintained the official register. The McGavicks welcomed all visitors who wished to pay their respects. And when they were digging up the bodies, sometimes they got artifacts, belongings that they had, and they held on to them until their families would come and visit so they could give it to the families.
Oh, that's so kind.
Yeah. In 1890, a committee was appointed to maintain the graves, and they eventually replaced all the wooden headboards with limestone markers. This is the largest Confederate cemetery in the South. And they are continuously working to upgrade this. A lot of companies have donated their time to keep cleaning the markers, and they do a really good job of trying to keep it, cared for.
I love that. German immigrant Johann Albert Lotz purchased 5 acres of land from Fountain Branch Carter in 1855. Lotz built his home on the land, and it took him 3 years. He was a master carpenter, and his home displayed this skill. He built 3 fireplaces with mantels, and they revealed the range of his skill from simplistic to complex. A wonderful black walnut wraparound handrail stretches from the ground floor to the second floor. It was an engineering feat for the time. The outside features cartouches, millwork, and hand-carved acorn finials. The house boasts a battle scar made by a cannonball when it flew through the roof, through the floor of a second-story room, and landed on the first floor and rolled. A charred rounded indentation can be seen on the floor. The home was across from the Carter house as mentioned before, so the house was witness to the battle and death as well. And the land was devastated. What we hadn't mentioned until now was that the Union had cut down most of the trees and poisoned the water. The Lotz house today is a Civil War museum. The Lotz family struggled after the war and relocated to California, and their daughter Matilda left for Paris to study art. She became very accomplished, and her portrait of George Hearst hangs in the Hearst Castle, which I'm sure I've seen, although I was quite young at the time.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice little fun fact, and I believe she painted Governor Stanford also, and his portrait hangs at Stanford University.
Nice.
The fact that bodies were moved after being buried may have led to some unrest at the Carnton mansion. The Restless Soldier is the most famous ghost at this location. His full-body apparition is seen walking through the mansion, and he likes to hang out on the back porch and is thought to be one of those Confederate generals that was laid out there. Occasionally, he ventures away from the house and marches the perimeter of the house as if on guard duty, or maybe he's just looking for his men. People know that he is nearby because of the sound of his noisy, booted footfalls. A former cook who worked for the McGavicks has been reluctant to leave the mansion as well. A photo captured her head hovering in a hallway many years ago. Ooh, why is it just her head?
A disembodied head.
Did they off with her head because she made something really bad for dinner?
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. You shouldn't give me that suggestion, because I make breakfast and lunch, and you usually make dinner.
So you're going to go off with my head if you
Maybe.
don't like what I make for dinner?
Maybe, although you're a pretty good cook. So.
We'll have ribeye every night. Does
Okay.
that save me?
Yes, indeed.
Carolyn McGavick is still here in her home, some say. She is this location's woman in white. People are not sure which of these ghosts is fond of breaking glass, but it happens sometimes. The spirit of a girl described as having long brown hair is believed to belong to a young woman who was killed here in the 1840s. Legend claims that she was murdered before the war by a jealous suitor. Several contractors have run into her and made hasty retreats from the house. The website hauntedhouse.com shares the following story, and it is incredible. I hope it's true, but it is so incredible it's hard to believe. A man, who they've called Mr. P, he had an ancestor who fought in the Franklin battle, and he came to visit the Carnton mansion a little bit after 5 p.m., so it was closed. So he walked around the place on a path that led to the back of the mansion, trying to soak up the atmosphere and thinking about his relative who fought here and survived. Near the porch, he saw the silhouette of a man that he thought was about to get on a horse, but the horse vanished. That already would make me go, maybe I shouldn't be back here. Noticing another man on the porch, Mr. P asked him what had happened to the horse. The man explained that the horse was shot from under the other soldier like his horse had been earlier. This mysterious man, standing on the porch dressed like a Civil War Confederate officer, went on to explain that whether on a horse or on foot, they would be at the mercy of the enemy tonight. Furthermore, if Mr. P was coming with him, P had better have a pistol or he wouldn't last long. The Civil War officer further predicts in an angry voice that not many men were going to make it through the night, and it was the fault of that fool, Hood, who had ordered his men into this soon-to-be slaughter. He then hums a line or two of a rallying song. Mr. P was thinking that this officer must have been part of a Civil War reenactment and must have thought that Mr. P was part of it, although you did see a horse disappear, so... Mr. P asked this officer what kind of carbine he was carrying. It's an Enfield 577. What do you have? Mr. P confesses that he doesn't have any and wouldn't know how to use it. His comment astonished and alarmed the officer, who urgently told him to quickly leave and go to either the Carter house or to town out of harm's way. The officer then talks to another spirit by his side. And of course, this whole time I'm wondering, isn't the officer wondering, like, what are you wearing? Where's your uniform?
One would imagine.
Well, Govern, if we are to die, let us die like men. The officer then throws his hat up in the air in an angry, forceful way and melts into the air. This surprised Mr. P. Though this general was solid and lifelike, he was a spirit. Mr. P then heard the sequence of the sounds of battle. The officer's voice yelling, "Charge, men, charge!" Then a swell of the sound of shots, shells, muskets, and cannons filled the air. He heard the music of a regiment band playing Annie Laurie. Then he heard a whole army of rebel yells, which were fierce, nerve-jolting cries. Terrified, Mr. P tried to run towards his car, surrounded by the unearthly din of battle, as he felt the cold, creepy feeling of death surrounding him. He found himself stumbling around in the graveyard near the mansion. The next day, Mr. P went back to Carnton Mansion when it was open and found out that the officer he had talked to was indeed the much-loved Irishman, General Pat Claiborne.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, I hope that story's true because it's amazing. But I'm like, what's weird is everything sounds residual about it, like they're still fighting the battle, you're hearing the noises, totally residual, except for that
General is speaking with him directly.
Interacted with it.
Yeah.
So it's like intelligent and residual. It's so weird.
Well, maybe the guy was just this mysterious Mr. P was just very sensitive. I mean, who knows?
I don't know.
It does sound pretty out of this world, but.
Or Mr. P was doing some funny stuff on the side.
Shroom.
Too much of that acid. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
The Lotz house has its ghosts as well. In fact, this house was described by the Travel Channel in 2012 as one of the most terrifying places in America. A woman wearing a nightgown is seen. That's pretty scary.
It depends upon what she looks like, I guess.
A woman wearing a nightgown is seen and heard crying out for her lost loved ones. This house also features a young female ghost who is witnessed looking out through the windows. The current owner's wife claims that she was asked by a woman one day in the home, "Where is Anne?" The wife was the only one in the home, and this woman was in period clothing. Papers and other items go missing and are found elsewhere in the house. The craziest story from the Lotz house is about a 911 call made from the house one evening. When the police arrived, they found the entire family sleeping. No one had made the call. The phone lines were checked and everything seemed fine. 2 more 911 calls were made from the house that evening.
I mean, they've got wounded soldiers everywhere. Of course they're going to pick up the phone and call 911. I'm trying to figure out how they would know to do that. But like, I don't know what connection that has to the battle, but... In 2018, the Lotz house was featured on the Travel Channel on Haunted Live with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, which was a show that was broadcast as an actual live ghost hunt. So they were actually getting feedback from people. They were doing it, I think, on Facebook. And so in the chat, a lot of people were letting them know if they saw something because they had 4 cameras set up in 4 rooms. And so people were like, "Hey, I saw something going on over in the keeper's room. You guys got to head over there and see what's going on."
Very cool.
They got Lotz to come through the spirit box. Several members were touched. Figures were seen on the staircase by people watching the live feed. Viewers also heard crashing noises. A Boo Bear went crazy in a room dubbed the Twins Room. Porter was in there and he used a millimeter to measure how tall the spirit was, and it seemed to be around 3 feet tall. It was cool. I've never seen this done before, but he just started lifting the millimeter up until it stopped going off.
That's cool. Yeah, you could see if you're actually interacting with the child or not.
Yeah, and it seemed like it was about 3 feet tall, so I think it was a child spirit. A K2 went crazy in the keeping room, which was the main hospital area, and 2 of the guys saw a little flash they described as looking like pixie dust, which almost made me think was something trying to manifest as a color.
Perhaps.
The house seems to be very active from what we saw. Robert Reagan visited the Lotz house in September of 2022 for National Ghost Hunting Day and writes of his experience on the Brother Rice High School blog. What we learned during the ghost tour was that there was a plethora of spooky and unexplainable events occurring within the Lotz house. Items had gone missing and turned up in the middle of the hallway. Pieces of cannonballs had been found in corners of various rooms. I was wondering, was that right after the war, or is this residual? I mean, what does that mean?
What is, yeah.
Could you describe exactly were they real pieces of cannonball?
I need more information.
Souvenir t-shirts in the gift shop, which I ended up buying, were thrown from their shelves and strewn across the floor. I'm wondering if they have pieces of cannonball that are there in the museum and they get moved to a different place or something.
Perhaps.
And these weren't just stories, they were recollections from our tour guide who had experienced them firsthand. Phantom faces in pictures, sudden booming knocks, a disappearing lady in white. The list of supernatural phenomena experienced in the house was endless. One frightening experience I personally had during the tour was when the tour guide brought the group into the first upstairs bedroom. The group gathered around the tour guide who was standing in the center of the bedroom, and my brother and I ended up standing at the edge of the room with our backs turned to another bedroom. The bedroom we had our backs to had its door open and its lights turned off. Several times while our tour guide was talking, my brother and I turned to look at each other, reacting to a strange sound coming from the corner of the bedroom behind us. There was a creaking sound and a popping sound, and though they were soft, they were distinct. While some might explain the noises as simply the house settling, while you're in a notoriously haunted house, ghosts are just as plausible an explanation. Sounds to me like somebody was moving around on the floor and kind of leaning this way and that way.
Yep. The Carter house is plagued with a poltergeist. Some claim that it's one of the Carter's daughters named Annie. A tour guide was interrupted one afternoon by a guest who pointed out that a statue behind the guide was moving up and down. Objects appear and disappear on a regular basis, and staff members claim that they feel a child tug at their clothes. The apparition of a little girl was seen running in the upstairs hallway by a staff member. Makes us wonder if this is the same little girl seen in all 3 houses. A disembodied female voice is heard occasionally, and people claim she sounds friendly. And since Todd Carter died in this house, it's not surprising that people claim to see his ghost as well. Recently, a visitor claimed she saw Todd sitting on the side of the bed of his former room. He was there only for a moment, and then he disappeared.
This is a crazy story we found on TripAdvisor by Tim S., and I also hope that this one's true, although it sounds incredibly crazy as well. My friends and I, in Halloween of 2001, went to this house trying to scare ourselves because we'd heard that it was haunted. We arrived that night and pulled in the driveway. There was a bonfire going on, and there were 2 guys and a girl standing there who were wearing clothing from the Civil War. We got out of the car, and they were extremely friendly. They told us that they worked for the Carter house and gave tours during the day. They explained that the house always has kids like us trying to scare themselves on Halloween, so they were there to watch it. They gave us a tour of the outside of the house and showed us the bullet holes. After we walked around the outside of the house, they told us to drive to Carnton Plantation to further give ourselves a spook. We backed out of the driveway and forgot which way to turn. We pulled back up the driveway again, and there was nothing. No people, no fire, no smoldering ashes. Nothing that would give us any indication that we had spoken to or seen anyone. To this day, my friends and I won't discuss that night. Now, this sounds like incredibly crazy to me to make something like that up. It'd be one thing if it was, we saw some Civil War soldiers marching around or whatever, but to actually they had this interaction where they were talking about giving tours.
Right.
So I don't know where these spirits are coming from, if they're intelligent spirits who are like, hey, let's have some fun.
Well, that's kind of where my head went with the whole 911 calls, because if they're intelligent, they see what is capable these days.
Yeah.
And, maybe reliving their trauma of the battle, they're trying to call 911 for help.
Yeah. So very interesting. I hope it's a real story.
The battlefield itself is rife with activity. There are disembodied voices, the sounds of people running, gunshots, and drums. As has happened at Gettysburg, ghosts have been mistaken as reenactors. One visitor to the site claimed to have had a long conversation with a Confederate soldier who disappeared after their discussion. In all, 1,700 Confederate soldiers were buried in the cemetery. One lone specter has been seen standing guard outside the cemetery. Mischievous ghosts that some believe are twin brothers enjoy tickling people and tugging on clothing. A young girl's spirit runs about the cemetery as well.
So much suffering happened on this plot of land. The Civil War brought strong emotions to the town of Franklin. Has something from the past continued on into the present? Is the residual energy continuing the fight? Do ghosts continue to walk these historic homes? Is the Franklin battlefield haunted? That is for you to decide. We definitely need to make it to Franklin, Tennessee, because I want to see all of these places.
Me too.
And especially because they're all haunted.
Even better.
And battlefields are always great. I love visiting those.
Absolutely.
We're glad that you guys have listened to this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye. Atlanta, Georgia had fallen to General William T. Sherman on September 1st, 1864. Should I reread that since I did the old person tooth whistle as I was speaking?
I can't even do it. How do you do that?
General William T. Sherman. Sherman.
I can't even whistle regularly. I'm always like...
Yeah, I know.
So I definitely can't whistle through my teeth. Yes, Kelly, could you re-record that line?
Okay. The ammunition magazine was placed in the rifle's buttstock. I said butt.
Buttstock.
I said butt.
What exactly is a buttstock? Do we want to know?
She would soon find out why the livestock. She would soon find out why the livestock. She would soon find out why the livestock were shaken.
Not like a buttstock?
Good grief. But a wonderful black walnut wap-a-wound.
It's a wap-a-wound.
It's too early in the morning.
It's kind of your alliteration that you love so much. We've got wonderful walnut wraparound. Just threw the black in the middle there.
Except I didn't white it.
Oh. People know that he is nearby because of the sound of his noisy booted. I can never do booted.
It's booted.
Booted. It's just hard to
Boo.
say. Booted. It goes with ghost.
Boo.
Booted.
To you.
It's a disembodied footfall, so it would be booted.